In this video, I'm going to talk about how pacemaker cells maintain an endogenous internal rhythm of membrane potential changes that lead to a series of action potentials within the cell. These action potentials each lead to contraction of the heart. And so the pacemaker cells, by means of the process I'm about to explain, generate the pulse that the heart maintains through this internal logic of opening and closing of channels based on what the membrane potential is. So to start out, we have to remember that the membrane potential of the cell exists at all because the cell spends lots and lots of its energy, a high fraction of its energy, pumping sodium out, pumping potassium in, and thereby setting up a gradient of charge across the membrane. Now, the degree to which that membrane difference is allowed or reinforced is the job of the leak channels. This is the potassium leak channel. This is the sodium leak channel. Because the potassium allows significantly more potassium out than the sodium leak channel allows sodium in, that maintains a negative membrane potential. And our example voltage across this membrane, these are millivolts, is minus 65. The heart does not, the pacemaker cells do not stick around. They don't rest. So resting potential is kind of a misnomer for this one cell type because there is, whenever the cell reaches resting potential, it happens to be changing membrane potential, and it's moving from resting potential to threshold potential because of the activity of the funny channel. The funny channel is letting sodium in. Why is the funny channel open? Well, the funny channel is always open when the membrane potential is less than threshold potential. So in this case, less than minus 45 millivolts. Once threshold potential is reached, you have closure of the sodium channels known as funny channels. So now that we're at threshold, and anytime we're above threshold, the funny channel is closed. And when you first reach threshold, however, another voltage-gated channel, the voltage-gated calcium channel, is going to open. And it's going to let calcium in. Remember that there is another pump that animal and plant cells have that makes sure that the calcium is continually being sent out of the cytoplasm. Now calcium is being let in, and it comes in quickly. And I know that it's coming in pretty quickly because the slope of that line is much steeper slope of the line allowed by the funny channels. So it was the depolarization above threshold potential that opened these calcium channels. So the calcium channels are open, and then through just plain old time, they close. They close up at the peak of the action potential. And you know, that action potential is referred to as depolarization phase, but I want to admit now that once that channel's closed up there, that's a bad word for it. So we call it depolarization, but it's actually a reversal of polarity because you've gone above zero on this graph. That means you've gone beyond the point where there's equilibrium and up to where it's actually more negatively charged in the interstitial fluid with respect to the cytoplasm. But at a peak, and this is actually a process that is begun by voltage, and then it takes a particular amount, it's open for a particular amount of time, and then these gates close. That peak voltage. Now, these channels are closed, these channels are open, and because it's potassium and potassium's been concentrated in the cell and is therefore being driven out by concentration, that begins to depolarize the membrane. You see it, repolarize the membrane. You see that positively charged particles are now, positively charged cations are now exiting the cell, and that leads to a repolarization of the cell. Depolarization by calcium, repolarization by potassium. Notice too that in this area here, where membrane potential has reversed and now just temporarily you've got this going on, only at that time is potassium actually being driven out of the cell by charge. By the time you get back to zero, charge has nothing to do with it. And anytime you're below zero, so the membrane is back in its normal range of being more negative inside than out, well, when you get there, you are only driving potassium out of the cell by its concentration gradient. Now, what happens below threshold potential? I'm asking you to remember that when it's below threshold potential, the funny channels open. Now, the potassium channels are still open. These channels are still open, and they don't close until you get back to resting potential. So when you get back to resting potential, now potassium stops leaving because the gates of these potassium channels have been closed. Okay, so funny channels open, calcium channels open, potassium channels open, potassium channels and funny channels open. And then you start over again, right? Then you're back to resting potential, but like I said, the heart never rests. These pacemaker cells never rest. And so once again, you're in that pacemaker potential phase. I was trying to draw a straight line there. I'm just not good.